Ford, our other producer, we've been talking with Chris, and there had been mention that, in theory, after the success of Jim and Andy, that maybe you'd love to do something with Robert. We jumped on that. She put us together, and we excitedly came to Robert, and he said, oh, Chris, interesting, but I don't want to do a film about me. We should do my father. And it was that simple. And Emily and I came back to Chris. Chris, you said you were in to explore.
I didn't make it up. Okay.
No. It's what happened.
No, we should start making up stuff now too. We can spread all kinds of disinformation through this highbrow crowd.
Robert, had you been considering making a film about your father before Chris approached you?
A bunch of years ago, my dad wanted to make a documentary about George Hamilton and his son Ashley, and we even shot a few days on it, and then my dad watched it and he goes, this is garbage. You know what? There's this other father and son. So we were talking about father and son documentaries, and I was like, is he fucking with me? Anyway, you're right about the inception, but it all came down to we were just meant to come together and fall into this kind of crazy homage.
I think what's special about the film and what sets it apart from a lot of biographical films is that you kind of leave in the process of finding the film. That's very much a big part of this film, and I think part of the playfulness of the film and also the power of the film. So I'm wondering if you want to talk about that decision.
I don't know if it was a decision. I think it found us in a way. I think I had said this that when we were filming on the very first day, Senior was talking about the documentary that he made, Rittenhouse Square, and he said, if you trust anything, anything can happen. And I felt like that. We mentioned that many times that it felt like the guiding light for the project.
I mean, we had plenty of times where we didn't even know if we had a film. Because it did start off where Robert wanted to do something about his dad. And then pretty quickly, as you see, his dad sort of had no interest, but was kind of shining us on because he wanted to do something else. And we came to a point halfway through where we're like, what is this? And Chris, we would have these meetings, and Chris was like, I feel like we should be filming the meetings too, because it was all so absurdist. But then obviously when the Parkinson's kicked in more and more, and we just did what Chris said, which is sort of follow the film, we kind of thought maybe we have something, and we even watched a cut early on, and it was like, is there even a reason this should exist? And I remember watching it and going, wow, this is an interesting portrait of an artist. And that was before the sort of latter half of the film was even shot. So it really was its discovery as we were making it.
Particularly when Pop said, we should split into 2 camps. I was like, what? And so Camp Ford and him start making this art movie, and we're like, what the fuck? Now what the fuck are we supposed to do? And it was just one of those trust exercises, and you gotta let this insanity play out and try to be honest.
Early on, I think what's really interesting, Senior always knew he was making his version of the film, because when we first showed up, Chris and I, he just kept saying, here's all these DVDs, here's all these films, and we're just gonna cut. And I think we genuinely were confused, wait, we're here to film you right now. But he had an agenda from day one, and it was about us catching up to what he had in mind, in a sense. But that was a pretty interesting process. And at one point, we started questioning, well, do we need to film Chris and Robert in the edit room to balance this all out? And how far did we go, what you guys were just talking about?
But how far did you go with the 2-film thing?
Fortunately, this film has a director, it's Chris Smith, where this thing would have been bananas.
But we do see, obviously, so Kevin, you were with Senior? Was that how it worked? Okay.
Yeah, I was in the other camp.
But you were also shooting with him.
Yeah, Chris and I shot the movie together, and there were times we're all doing multiple projects. So there were times where I was alone with Senior and filming in the edit room and stuff like that.
So obviously, Chris is the director, and but did you have a sense that you were kind of channeling Senior in some way as you?
We all were.
Yeah.
I think that was hope, at least. You know, I think the term is nebulous with this. I mean, there's a group of people that came together to try to make something that we felt would be, you know, in the spirit of Senior. And I think that was the thing that we always kept coming back to at almost every decision, was just sort of like trying to just look at things differently. You know, I think the one thing that, you know, that very first shot, he's looking there, he's like, great shot, there's good movement, nobody's sitting. And like, you know, it was like he was always trying to push us to think differently in the way that we approach not only this, but I think just in everything.
I was curious about, you know, you shot this over several years, obviously interrupted by COVID, and until quite close to the end. So I'm wondering how your relationship with the project and with the material changed. I mean, it started as, you know, obviously the idea of Senior making a film as well, also wanting to, you know, capture him, and then also capture in the very moving final, you know, stages of the film, his final stages, and then you finish the film after his death. So I'm wondering about how your relationship with this material changed over time.
I mean, well, I think we can all agree it's just been the most ridiculous 1,000 days ever. And then to have this as both kind of a focus point between this and whatever else we might have been tending to. And it kind of wound up perfectly. I do want to say that, I mean, what really happened in the 11th hour was linear creative people wrestled this albatross to the ground and made it really kind of like, you know, it feels like a story that you can follow. I'm imagining you followed it, it made sense, and right even from the beginning when he's like, nobody's moving, good move, and I feel all the artists in the room going, that's right, you know, and the kind of eccentricity of it. But yeah, there were challenges, but I mean, there's been, you know, what hasn't been a challenge in the last bunch of years, you know?
But I'm just curious about obviously the 2021 sequences, and I imagine they were difficult to shoot and to be in, you know, this for you, Robert.
Anything emotional, Susan's going to handle.
Well, I will say, no, I will say, just back up for one sec, that COVID created an interesting opportunity, actually, because of the phone calls that you see that take us through, and because the travel wasn't possible, certainly wasn't safe for Senior, and even for Robert going there early on, they relegated it to calls, and he came very prepared for each call with a section of Senior's life he wanted to cover. And then, again, we didn't know how we were using any of the footage, but that became part of the spine that Chris found as he was using Senior's films to understand Senior, since he wasn't giving us anything. And so that Q&A, I don't know if we would have done it like that if it hadn't been for the challenge of COVID, so it was something that was wonderful, and I feel like almost jealous that he got the opportunity to do that with his dad, and it was really cool. And then I think when it became a bit safer to travel, they had covered the you know, filmology, the kind of chronology of that. And so at that point, it was really about what other questions do you have left? And the crazy part, obviously, which I think comes across in the film, is that when Robert finally is trying to really ask his dad these things beyond movies, which was their big connection point for most of their lives, you know, Senior doesn't really know who he's talking to. And he's still trying to talk about movies, but yet there is something emotional and connected there. So I do think it was incredibly powerful. It had to be tough for you, but you also had Exie there helping, you know, a little bit of a buffer when you have a young person who's just very excited.
Yeah, and Senior's whole vibe was always, this is my feeling, was like, oh, if things are about to get tragic, we're gonna have to double up the laughs, you know? Like, what? Like, don't process the feeling, just crack more jokes? So, I was even at one point like, Dad, we don't really have an act 3 until you fucking bite it, so you gotta, when you think you're almost done, he goes, fuck you, I'll go when I'm ready to go.
And interesting, just side comment to this is, in that sequence in 2021 that you were asking about, I mean, flat out, at that point, we were all being led to believe, or we thought genuinely, that there was a lot more time left. You know, medically and stuff, we had had conversations, and there was an optimism that this wasn't going to be, you know, Robert's last chance or Exton's last chance. That's the way it worked out.
I'm wondering about the decision to shoot and include your Zoom session with your analyst in the film, Robert.
Chris couldn't believe that Kevin just walked in while I was Zooming with my shrink. I was at that point, we were so broke. He probably could have shot me taking a dump, but it's not that kind of movie. We knew we had to get real. This is the New York Film Festival. You gave us such a lovely endorsement at the beginning. This can't be some nepotistic, controlled retrospective. This is not that kind of party. This needs to transcend that. And a documentary film is a very different bar, even in the narrative. So we knew that if we weren't willing to trust each other and go to places that any publicist would say, never! It's like, we had to start at never and then take it forward.
I do remember the very first day of shooting with Robert and his dad. Robert had us come out to the Hamptons, and we'd only met once, I think, before that, and I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know like how controlled everything would be. I didn't know we'd be turning over cards at the end of the day. Like, I didn't know anything, and like, when we showed up, Robert, the only thing he said was like, "There's nothing off limits," and he walked away, and that was it. So like, and it kind of, you know, I always was trying to impart on Kevin this always be shooting, and like, that was the thing that we tried to always be rolling as much as we could, just to see what we would capture.
I want to spend a moment on Senior's work, which I think this film does, I think, a beautiful job of, you know, just introducing, hopefully, I think, a new generation of audiences to his, what I think is a really important body of work. So I'm wondering if you can say a bit about how you wove in the material and, you know, just the process of revisiting his films. And I do think you have made a film in the spirit. I mean, there is a, obviously before it gets emotional, as you put it, Robert, there is a looseness and a freewheeling quality to the film that I think is very much in Senior's spirit.
I'll say, you know, as anyone that knows the documentary form, it's like the editors are actually, you know, the unsung heroes, and Amanda Griffin and Dan Kohler are both here, as long as they're illustrious. Yeah, it was a long process. You know, it was like we were editing as we went, and Dan had great insights of just looking at how these reflected and sort of how each film could reflect back onto different chapters of his life, and so that sort of became this like door that opened that sort of turned into the film that you see here. So it was, you know, we had it wasn't every movie. I feel like at the end you look back and you're like, oh, that seems obvious, and then but like getting there is never quite that easy. But especially with this one, because we're trying to balance like three different things that all fit together in this nebulous way that, you know, but I have to say, like, just my experience of being around Senior changed my life forever, just in the sense of that it changed the way that I make movies entirely. Like, I used to be incredible, like trying to control everything in a documentary where you're not supposed to control things. I've sort of, in the last 3 years, completely given that up, where I just, you know, I don't know, just like whenever things are going wrong, my partner Ryan will just sort of remind me, just think of Senior, which is just, you know, there's like, we were shooting in Portugal, and there was a hailstorm, and like light was going from like bright sun to clouds, and
100-foot wave, yo.
You know, and it was just like the worst conditions you could ever, and the old me wanted to shut down and just, we're done. And she was just, I think of Senior, you just embrace that, and that would become part of what you're filming. And I think it's, you know, I even saw in here, there's a shot of Robert, and no one probably noticed it, but at one point the sun came out from under the umbrella, it's hitting the back shoulder, and like, you know, something like that, I would have stopped, you know, the moment that was being spoken, because that would be more important. And I realized none of that really matters. And what Senior, I think, imparted on me was just to like, life is way more important than the details of any particular, like where a cup of water is, where I used to be more focused on where the cup of water was than what was being said. So, you know, but it really was just like trying to think differently about the way that you approach things, you know.
And Robert, these are films you know very well, your dad's movies. Like, I'm just wondering if, you know, looking at them again in the process of making this, has your relationship with these films evolved over the years?
It has, and again, I wanted to thank you because when we were talking earlier, Dennis said, you know, we really should get some more energy behind a retrospective for senior stuff, and they happen. You know, and we've done a fair amount of stuff now. He really just cares about New York anyway, so hopefully we can get a little more of that here. But to answer the question, yeah, I mean, these films have been like literally the sound, they're like the mixtape of my life, you know? So I still, and you know, Mrs., you know, I quote these lines all the time, like, I don't know why, but in that 2 Tons of Turquoise, it's, what about Larry? He's into tacos. That's an answer or a question. It's such a non sequitur that it works for anything.
You know, another kind of a side note of flavor here is part of the senior cut was he wanted to go through every single one of his movies. And again, not realizing the exact nature of that ticking clock that he was facing, I can tell you he was so enthused and enjoying every moment of watching his body of work back. And so if nothing else, it was in part something that I took from it was to live your life, make these films, and at the end still find total enjoyment and pride in the work that he had made. Even though a lot of it was pretty crazy, he was amused until the end and you know, making a lot of comments. Some of that is captured in the
And Ford, you're such an angel to my dad in that last scene when the project is done. I really realize he's closing down his kind of like life's work with you. So if you think about what happens in that scene, it's just, I think we're good. You don't have to come back too soon, you know, until it's so obvious, all the subtext that's being spoken. So I'm glad you had to deal with all the real heavy father-son stuff. I really wasn't fucking up to it. That's why we split the work amongst the 6 of us.
Fortunately, I'm getting the sign that we are out of time, but I want to thank all of you for this conversation.